Hey heroes, and welcome to another uncanny episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelate. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. This week's tale begins with a boy, the son of one of the wealthiest men on the planet. Born in Beverly Hills and ostensibly raised there without a mother, this boy lived a self-centered life of privilege. Like most children his age, he enjoyed playing with his toys. However, his abusive father disapproved of this and punished him for it. While the boy was highly intelligent, particularly when it came to machinery and technology, he seemed to have little interest in putting his skills to work. But then, on his 21st birthday, his father cut off his trust fund allowance and told him to get a job. The next day, the boy, now a man, killed his father with a car bomb and claimed his massive inheritance. With that one act, the man realized that his true calling was murder, and began to pursue a career as an assassin. He quickly found success, but within a year he grew bored with the simple act of killing, and sought ways to make his job more entertaining using toys and gadgets. Then he hit upon an idea. Using his vast wealth and engineering genius, he began constructing his ideal death trap, hidden beneath a New York landfill. A twisted amusement park designed to kill anyone trapped inside. Thus was born the first Murderworld, and the enigmatic assassin behind it became known as Arcade. However, it should be noted that, much like the subject of last week's video, Arcade is known to have given differing, contradictory accounts of his life, and so while the above story is perhaps the most often repeated and well substantiated, its true veracity remains somewhat ambiguous. In any event, Murderworld would prove to be a major success, both for clients who wanted their targets to suffer, and as a never-ending source of amusement for Arcade, who charged just enough to cover expenses and continue his business indefinitely. In his endeavors, Arcade also employed two equally enigmatic associates. One was a dour man with a Scottish accent named Mr. Chambers, who typically worked behind the scenes. As an expert engineer, electrician, and all-around handyman, he helped Arcade build and maintain Murderworld. The other was a woman who appeared to be of East Asian descent, Ms. Locke. A trained assassin and fighter, she was proficient in hand-to-hand combat and the use of firearms. While not nearly as flamboyant or audacious, Locke shared Arcade's passion for killing and ultimately became his closest confidant. Soon, as a birthday gift from him to her, the two started an annual tradition. If Locke succeeded in killing Arcade on his own birthday, then she would inherit all of his resources and technology, including Murderworld itself. Eventually, Arcade began to worry that his theme park of death was too powerful for his victims, leading to more boredom, but then he was approached by members of the European crime syndicate, the Magia, who hired Arcade to target a university student named Brian Braddock. Braddock was one of several individuals they suspected of being the English superhero Captain Britain, and since he was in New York at the time, the Magia elected to use an American contractor to eliminate him. Arcade and his associates found and abducted the masked hero using a vehicle that looked like a normal garbage truck, but was specially built to grab their victims off the street. However, the captain was with Spider-Man at the time, and so the wall crawler was also taken. The two superhumans were dropped into Murderworld, where they were forced to survive inside an enormous pinball table, as well as other mind-bending tricks and deadly traps. Arcade also captured Braddock's beloved, Courtney Ross, and made her the prize in an enormous claw machine. In the midst of all this, Spider-Man succeeded in breaking into Murderworld's access panels and disrupting things from behind the scenes, before helping Captain Britain rescue Courtney Ross. The three captives all escaped, but Arcade was thrilled that someone was strong enough to survive Murderworld, and took it as a challenge. Relishing the opportunity, he started rebuilding and advertised his desire to take on other superhumans. That caught the attention of the criminal duo, the Juggernaut and Black Tom Cassidy, who hired Arcade to take on their mutant foes, the Uncanny X-Men, which would prove to be the start of a long-lasting obsession for the red-haired assassin. Arcade and his cohorts succeeded in capturing the mutant heroes, abducted several of their allies as hostages, including Amanda Sefton, Colleen Wing, and Betsy Braddock, and even brainwashed Colossus into turning against his teammates by making him believe that he was a Soviet hero called the Proletarian. When the X-Men ultimately survived all of the tricks and traps that he had prepared, Arcade actually ejected them from Murderworld and released his hostages, conceding defeat but warning that he would try again in the future. In another incident, Arcade provided technology to the mutant criminal Toad, who wished to build his own Murderworld in a seemingly abandoned castle. Toad targeted the Angel, one of the original X-Men, but Ben Grimm, the Thing from the Fantastic Four, ended up getting captured as well, and the two heroes teamed up to survive. In the midst of that conflict, Arcade contacted Toad and demanded the payment that he was owed. Unaware of the seller's identity, the Angel agreed to pay the Toad's debts on the condition that he convert the Death Trap into a legitimate amusement park. For a brief time, Toad World was a success, but what Toad didn't know was that the castle where he built it was actually a stateside residence of Dr. Doom, and a robotic duplicate of Doom quickly intervened on its master's behalf. On a tangential note, Doom often used these Doombots to perform tasks that he considered more menial, making it seem as though he was intervening personally. Each Doombot is programmed to behave as if it were the real Doom, and even believes itself to be when not in the presence of the real Doom or another Doombot. Even telepaths are apparently unable to tell the difference. However, there have been instances in which the real Doom will disapprove of a Doombot's actions or methods and destroy it because of this. But back to the story at hand, the Doombot in question drove Toad out of his castle and captured Arcade, blaming him for the whole debacle. In response to this, Ms. Locke once again abducted several of the X-Men's friends and loved ones, this time to blackmail the mutant heroes into rescuing Arcade. Although by the time they got there, the smooth-talking assassin had already convinced the phony Doom to spare his life. Meanwhile, Professor Xavier recruited several former members of the team to infiltrate Murderworld and rescue their captive allies at the same time. When this second group was separated from one another, Havoc was dropped into a holographic space battle, Iceman was pitted against an android hockey team, Polaris landed in a deadly merry-go-round and was attacked by a robotic duplicate of Ilyana Rasputin, while Banshee battled android gunslingers in an Old West-style shootout. In the end, that team succeeded in rescuing the hostages, while the other X-Men resolved the whole situation by convincing Arcade to apologize to Doom, who, having come to respect the X-Man Storm, accepted. Funnily enough, the reason that we know that this was a Doombot and not the genuine Victor Von Doom was because during the whole ordeal, Arcade used its armor to light a match. Months later, the real Doom noticed the mark that was left by this, and destroyed the robot for not killing Arcade on the spot. In the meantime, Arcade began incorporating more exotic machinery into his murder worlds, at some point hacking into the X-Men's computer systems and copying the schematics for their Danger Room, which included alien technology from the Shi'ar Empire. At one point, he attempted to convert the X-Men into electronic energy so that he could trap them in a virtual world, but inadvertently struck several Micronauts from the seemingly subatomic Microverse, who ultimately escaped and regained their physical forms. There were also times in which he would offer his services to villains who wished to test themselves against robotic duplicates of various heroes, namely the X-Men, allowing Murderworld to serve as a training ground for clients like the shape-shifting mutant Mystique or the international assassin Slaymaster. He continued his annual Murder Day competitions with Ms. Locke, and one year when she attacked while disguised as Dr. Doom, Arcade tricked the X-Men, Colossus, and Kitty Pryde into defending him. Sometime after that, Arcade seized control of the UK-based criminal group, the Crazy Gang, who were formerly led by the notorious reality warper Mad Jim Jaspers. With them at his command, he once again captured Courtney Ross, luring Captain Britain and his team, Excalibur, into a London-based Murderworld where their minds were swapped with members of the Crazy Gang. However, Kitty Pryde was also a member of Excalibur during this time, and she was able to use her phasing abilities to pull Arcade from his control room, dropping him into Murderworld itself. Furthermore, after her previous encounter with Arcade, she worked with fellow hacker Doug Ramsey to write a program allowing her to seize control of Murderworld's systems. The end result of all of this is that after years of menacing the X-Men and various other heroes, Arcade was finally dealt a meaningful defeat and sent to prison for the very first time. Naturally, the body swapping was also undone, and the Crazy Gang were taken into custody as well. However, Locke and Chambers escaped. And so even while Arcade was locked up in Britain's Darkmoor prison, his associates continued his work with robotic duplicates and holographic trickery. In one instance, they pitted Excalibur against a group of cartoonish foes called the Loonies. During the events of Operation Galactic Storm, when the Earth got involved in a conflict between the Kree and Shi'ar empires, Arcade and Locke took advantage of the situation and obtained alien holochip and virtual reality technology from a profiteering Shi'ar foot soldier. They tested these devices on their first superhuman targets, Spider-Man and Captain Britain, making it seem as though the rest of Excalibur had been killed by the demons Nightmare and Despair. However, Spider-Man realized that the seemingly slain heroes were actually robots, and repurposed technology from the phony Phoenix to emulate her powers long enough to destroy the fake demons. The two heroes were then seemingly attacked by a litany of Spider-Man's enemies, but ultimately realized that the trap they found themselves in was a layered one, as in addition to the android attackers and holographic images, their perceptions were being affected by advanced virtual reality. Thus, Spider-Man and Captain Britain successfully escaped from yet another of Arcade's schemes. Despite repeatedly failing to best his superhuman opponents, Arcade continued to enjoy the game. Furthermore, before his case went to trial, Locke and Chambers were able to use his tricks and technology to manipulate the evidence against him, ultimately preventing prosecutors from sufficiently proving his culpability in any actual crimes. Seeking to further refine his devices and techniques, he began targeting other opponents, like the swordsman from the Mojoverse, Shatterstar, and the half-Shi'ar mutant Adam X, aka Extreme. Arcade attempted to pit these two warriors against each other, ostensibly by holding Shatterstar's wife, Windsong, hostage. When Shatterstar learned that this was another holographic ruse, he tried to kill Arcade, only to find that he struck down a robot and that the real Arcade had already escaped. In another incident, a corrupt and bigoted businessman named Carl Carriage hired Arcade to tackle the gay mutant superhero Northstar, instructing him not to kill his target, but simply to tire him out. The mad assassin performed his duty amicably, allowing Carriage to fight the hero one-on-one. However, Arcade also prepared a video implicating Carriage in illegal activity, as a prize for whoever won, and despite his exhaustion, Northstar ultimately claimed victory and released the tape to the public. Arcade continued to develop new tricks and traps, at one point building a semi-truck that could unfold and transform into a fully operational Murderworld. He tested this mobile Murderama on Johnny Blaze, who at the time was separated from the demon that allowed him to transform into a Ghost Rider. In this endeavor, he was hired by an undead priest of the dark god Baal, who was annoyed that Arcade was more concerned with trying out his traps than actually killing Blaze. Suffice it to say, Johnny survived, killed the undead priest with his Hellfire shotgun, and thwarted Arcade's schemes yet again. Rather than kill or capture Arcade, Blaze simply locked him in the priest's coffin and left him in the Murderama truck, which his ally, Wolf, then drove into the middle of the desert and abandoned. He ultimately escaped from this and continued his annual game with Ms. Locke, but then one year she got too close for comfort and slashed the left side of his face. Overwhelmed by pain, Arcade fatally stabbed her in response, killing the one person he might have been considered close to. Scarred by this experience, both physically and emotionally, Arcade fell deeper into madness. Feeling the need to shift the blame for Locke's death, he murdered several other women in a similar fashion and attempted to frame the X-Man Wolverine. To aid him in this endeavor, he hired the illusion-casting mutant Martinique Wingard, aka Mastermind, who inherited her codename and powers from her father, Jason Wingard, the original Mastermind. However, one of the victims was friends with another X-Man, Gambit, and he and Wolverine ultimately uncovered Arcade's plot. In the wake of this, Arcade was institutionalized, and over the following months he slowly regained his sanity. Or that is to say, he regained a level of sanity that would be considered normal for him, and soon resurfaced to continue causing trouble. At some point he also apparently started launching annual attacks on other notable targets, like the mutant mercenary Domino. He was then hired by Mendel Strom, who at the time was known as Gaunt but is probably better known as the Robot Master. On behalf of Norman Osborn, Strom tasked Arcade with killing a vigilante who had usurped the Green Goblin identity. Behind the mask, this goblin was actually Phil Urich, nephew to the noted Daily Bugle reporter Ben Urich. But once again, when the goblin bested his tricks and traps, Arcade let him go free, much to Gaunt's frustration. Getting back to his old self, he started using robot duplicates of Ms. Locke, programmed to replicate her personality, and completed his recovery with facial reconstruction surgery, restoring his visage to normal. After that, he did some contract work for Black Air, a corrupt British intelligence unit specializing in unusual artifacts and paranormal events, who sometimes clashed with Excalibur. When Black Air refused to let Arcade leave their employ, he coerced Colossus into helping him fake his death to escape them. However, he couldn't resist allowing them the opportunity to discover his ruse, so the game could continue. After that, he was hired by a reclusive European crime lord, Etienne Rousseau, and tasked with testing potential candidates to become his personal bodyguard, one of whom was Domino. At the same time, Arcade took a job from the extra-dimensional media mogul Mojo to test Shatterstar and see if he still had his edge after spending so much time on Earth. To kill two birds with one stone, once Domino had proven herself against the competition, as Arcade suspected she would, he forced her and Shatterstar to fight, holding their mutual friend Richter hostage. At the end of the day, Domino stood victorious and completed her own mission to arrest Rousseau on behalf of the UN Security Council. Arcade, meanwhile, having fulfilled his obligations to both clients, released Richter and once again got away scot-free thanks to the use of a robotic decoy. He subsequently attended the wedding of Brian Braddock and Megan Puchanu alongside many others who knew them, allies and adversaries alike. He also took a job eliminating drug dealers in New York on behalf of a rival dealer who wanted to eliminate the competition. However, he realized that one of the individuals he grabbed, a young man named Dougie Horton, was just a runner and not one of his actual targets, and decided to keep him alive as a hostage. That whole situation resulted in a confrontation with Spider-Man and the Black Cat, when the latter was hired to find Dougie. The two vigilantes defeated Arcade and left him for the police, although he evidently escaped soon afterwards. He was later hired by the mercenary Agent X to help rebuild a rundown amusement park that X had received as payment for a previous job. Arcade saw the potential for another Murderworld location, but Agent X insisted on not killing his own customers, and Arcade obliged. He also rented out his London-based Murderworld to Ophelia Sarkeesian, aka Viper, who attempted to use it to attack the X-Men, specifically targeting the cyberpathic mutant Sage. In the ensuing conflict, Wolverine ultimately tricked Viper into thinking that she'd succeeded by using an image inducer to impersonate Sage, taking a bullet to the head, and Viper teleported away convinced that she'd won. Meanwhile, Arcade relocated to Mordillo Island in the South China Sea, and with help from the island's resident robot, Brynaki, began reconstruction of his largest park yet, Murderland. Now, Brynaki is kind of another story entirely, but the short version is that he was built by a man named Simon Bretner, aka Mordillo, a former MI6 agent who became an assassin, but ultimately lost his life during a conflict with the master martial artist Shang-Chi. But anyway, around the time that he was building Murderland, Arcade also started dating a fellow criminal, Lorena Dodson, the White Rabbit, who, like him, was born into wealth and murdered for the thrill of it. Together, these two abducted Wolverine and the Black Cat and brought them to Mordillo Island, where the two clawed crime fighters were hunted for sport by clients who were led by a robotic duplicate of the notorious Kraven the Hunter. Suffice it to say, Wolverine and the Cat ultimately escaped from that situation and brought the two villains to the Savage Land, leaving them stranded where prehistoric creatures still walked the earth. Those two ultimately escaped from that situation and went their separate ways, with Arcade returning to Mordillo Island to complete the construction of Murderland. He abducted a number of guests from a high society party in the Hamptons, including the Constrictor, Nighthawk, and The Thing, bringing them to Murderland and forcing them to fight for their survival. While these captives overcame Arcade's challenges, largely thanks to the Thing's strength, Arcade was tempted to be a sore loser for once and kill them all anyway. However, Tony Stark, who'd also been brought to the island, reprogrammed Brynaki and stopped the annoyed assassin from doing so. Now, this would be far from his last scheme, but I think you all understand his modus operandi by now, and Arcade continued to prove himself an elusive foe, never remaining captured or imprisoned for long thanks to his vast wealth and ability to manipulate evidence in his favor. At some point, he hired a woman named Ms. Coriander to serve as a replacement for Locke and continue the annual tradition of trying to murder him on his birthday. It seems that as part of their agreement, ownership of the Murder Island fell to her, and she used it as a tropical getaway. Arcade, meanwhile, continued to clash with various superhumans, including Jamie Madrox's team of mutant investigators, X-Factor, the mutant singing sensation Allison Blair, aka Dazzler, the masked mercenary Deadpool, and the incredible demigod Hercules, several students of Hank Pym's Avengers Academy, and members of a modern group of young allies. And of course, he would continue to build new murder worlds and use them to target old foes like Spider-Man and the X-Men. On one occasion, he claimed to have given up murder and death traps to partner with an alien known as the Impossible Man and go into the toy-making business. However, this was revealed to be yet another ruse, and Arcade attempted to murder the seemingly unkillable alien by dropping a giant anvil on his head. Naturally, this didn't work, as the Impossible Man's species, the Pop-Upians, have complete mental control over their own body's molecules, making them both absurdly strong and virtually impervious to that kind of physical attack. While Arcade had been spurred on by the love of the game, over time his constant defeats began to wear on him and his reputation steadily decreased. But then he hit upon a new idea, presumably inspired by the Japanese novel Battle Royale, and returned to Coriander Island, formerly Mordillo Island, to make it happen. He abducted 16 teenage superhumans, trapped them on the island, and forced them to engage in a free-for-all deathmatch in which only one would survive. Now, we're all out of time for this week, so we're not going to go into what happened there, but if you want to read it for yourself, you can dive into the book Avengers Arena, which is available both on Marvel Unlimited and as a series of trade paperbacks. That is all I have for you today, but thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you can get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. And as always, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!